Thank you, Peter. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce the first keynote speaker of this year's programme. Since taking over in charge of BP in 2010, Bob Dudley has steered BP through some difficult times. The aftermath of the Macondo disaster, the breakup of the TNK-BP joint venture, and most recently, of course, the slump in oil prices, which has been so severe for the entire oil and gas industry. We're delighted to have Bob back with us again this year, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing what he has to say about the choices and challenges facing the industry. So please join me in welcoming Bob Dudley to this year's conference.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. Good morning, everyone, distinguished guests. It's a great pleasure to be here for one of our industry's great global gatherings. We meet here in London at a very interesting and challenging time for the industry, as Peter and Laura both said earlier. I see the conference theme talks of strategies for survival, and some days it can feel that way. On one hand, we have seen the price of oil plummet in the last 2 years, and it remains stubbornly low. On the other hand, the emerging economies continue to grow. Growth in many older economies may have stalled, but growth is still projected to be above 3% per year at a global level until the middle of this century. And the global population is still growing. When the so-called baby boomers were born, there were fewer than 3 billion people in the world. Today, there are more than 7 billion, and the UN estimates that the number will grow to 11 billion by the end of the century. I believe those longer wavelength trends will prove stronger and the forces currently keeping energy prices low. I don't think demand will fall off a cliff. The issue is one of oversupply. Our industry has been impacted by our own success, particularly in the shape of the shale revolution, but the long-term demand will keep growing, up by about a third by 2035 on the most likely path. This is the continuation of growth that is transforming lives. More than half of the increase in global consumption in the next few decades will come from power generation, and more than a third of that growth will be in places where 1 billion people currently lack adequate access to electricity, places such as India and Africa. But it is growth that comes at a time when we are back to a world of volatile and often low oil and gas prices. And at the same time, we have to help address climate change and make the transition to a lower carbon economy. So I believe this situation presents us with the 3 challenges Mike mentioned. Forgive me if you've heard this in Istanbul last week, but I think of them simply as 3 C's: the challenge of competitiveness, the challenge of carbon, and the challenge of choice. A few words about each one. The challenge of competitiveness arises because we live in an age of plenty, primarily driven by shale and oil. Demand may be strong, but supply is even stronger, and with half of the century's worth of oil and gas in countries' reserves alone. That is what has led to a sustained lower price and a new and necessary emphasis on competitiveness. The industry is undergoing profound change, but it is change for the better. At $100 oil, industry costs drifted up and all kinds of projects looked attractive. At today's prices, we have to maximize efficiency and minimize our costs. We have to focus on the highest quality projects and develop them with great capital discipline. Every dollar we have is scarce, and we must invest it wisely and carefully. The world is now hyper-competitive for capital. This is driving a lot of innovation and reform in our industry, and there will be a good future for the most competitive businesses. Those will be businesses that stand the test of time and are resilient to price cycles. They will be businesses that can adapt to the relentless increase in the clock speed, businesses that are agile and take opportunities to improve and strengthen safety and reliability. So what does this mean in practical terms? It means working as an industry to standardize what we do, to manage procurement specifications more rigorously, making things safer, simpler, and cheaper. It means developing new markets and new partnerships to distribute energy more economically and more widely. And it means finding new ways of working together. One example in BP's world is our recent agreement with Det Norsk in Norway. We've combined the strengths of both of our companies in a new business called Aker BP. It will bring together Det Norsk's streamlined operating model with BP's technical skills, global experience, and local offshore knowledge. Today's world also requires us to be very customer-focused and overall provide energy solutions to partners and governments. That can mean integrated offers that are across the upstream and the downstream. We also need to recognize the way consumer preferences are changing. More and more people want to buy from companies that demonstrate good social and environmental stewardship, and that's understandable. Today's circumstances are proving the old truth of the saying that necessity is the mother of invention, and that's quite literally true in terms of technological innovation. This tough economic climate is coming at the same time as extraordinary technological change. A new industrial revolution, some call it, and we must embrace it. As an industry, we've spent a century devising and using our own industry's oil and gas technologies, but now we can harness a new wave of technologies that apply right across the sector. The digital technologies, the big data, the artificial intelligence, robotics, virtual reality, and material sciences. They're changing everything. And I think our industry is playing catch up, but it is catching up fast. Technology is also relevant to the second challenge, the carbon challenge. As energy companies, we have a major part to play in the transition to a lower carbon economy. We have an important role in providing heat, light, and mobility for a changing and growing world. But at the same time, we must help to bend the curve of greenhouse gas emissions down. This issue is bigger than any single business or any single sector. It requires action on many fronts and by many parties. Governments have a major part to play, and it's very good to see last year's Paris Agreement will soon formally enter into force. And it's good to see this weekend's agreement in Kigali on HFCs. We should recognize the Paris Agreement is high level. We still need to see policies and actions that will help us move forward to its aims. I believe that the most important step governments can take to put that into action is to introduce more widespread carbon pricing to incentivize low carbon energy and energy efficiency. Not everyone agrees with that. But I think the industry can also act in several ways, of which can be supported by new technology. Most certainly, we can act to reduce the emissions from our own operations. We can provide products such as advanced fuels and lubricants that help customers reduce their own emissions. We can invest in natural gas as a substitute for coal in power and industry, and as a backup for intermittent resources of power. We can invest in carbon capture, use, and storage to support the important role that gas must play. And we can invest in renewable energy and reduce the carbon intensity of the energy we supply. We can also work together, as we do in the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, or OGCI, which came into being at the World Economic Forum at Davos. It brings together 10 national and international companies that collectively produce around 1/4 of the world's oil and gas. Let me just focus on gas for a moment, as it is the lowest carbon of the three fuels that provide the bulk of the world's energy. It burns with about half the carbon of coal. However, to really reap the benefits, it's important to reduce methane or methane emissions from natural gas production. Every step we take to reduce methane emissions increases the advantages of natural gas over coal and helps to stabilize and realize its potential to limit carbon emissions at scale while helping meet demand in an affordable way. And we can make progress on this much faster by working together to share what we learn and improve our operating practices, which is why BP is also an active participant in another important collaboration, the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership. Some of the brochures are in your packages. And we would encourage other companies to join it. You will hear more about this partnership from my colleagues, Elder Satre of Statoil and Patrick Pouyanné of Total later in the conference. Finally comes the challenge of the third one, choice. third C. As an industry, we need to make tough choices to remain competitive while also participating in the transition to a low-carbon economy. The scale of energy demand means that the world will continue to need energy from all sources, but the balance of the energy mix will need to change. For the next few decades, oil and gas can remain the dominant form of energy powering the global expansion, and we'll see less coal and more gas. Last year, gas grew at 1.7% a year, while coal declined by 1.8%, the largest fall on record. While natural gas provides an increasing share of power, oil has continued and will continue in a role as transport fuel for its huge advantages of energy density. This small little bundle of energy provides ease of transport and use and has compatibility with the existing infrastructure. Renewables are the fastest growing source of energy at nearly 7% a year. Now they should reach about 9% in the next 20 years of the fuel mix by 2035 as they are growing from a low base. Now that future is reflected in the choices we have made in BP. We're about 50% natural gas right now and heading towards 60% by the end of the decade as new projects come on stream. That includes projects in Trinidad and Tobago, in Oman, Egypt, the massive Shah Deniz 2 project in Azerbaijan, from which gas will be piped 3,500 kilometers from Azerbaijan through Georgia, Turkey, Greece, Albania, and on to Italy and Bulgaria by the Southern Gas Corridor system. All those projects are gas. We're also continuing to develop our own considerable interests in wind and biofuels and venturing, which give us more options for the future. Mike, let me conclude with a few words that are not so much about what we do, but how we do it, and the qualities we need to survive and succeed. As an industry, I think we face two particular issues. One is an issue of trust, and one is of talent. Trust is not just an issue for oil and gas leaders. There's a lack of trust across society today, in corporations, but also in governments. Big institutions, such as the EU and the UN, and even in sporting bodies. In BP, we've had our own experience with this after the tragic Deepwater Horizon accident in 2010. We retained the support of some very important partners, though it was touch and go for a while, and we have had to work really hard to rebuild trust. The lesson for us has been that you can rebuild trust, but it takes time. Each of us in industry can help with our own industries if we behave with integrity, if we listen, if we treat people with respect, and if we act as good ambassadors for our companies and our industries. If people in business and public life behave in that way, then gradually we can reestablish a new contract between consumers and suppliers, between shareholders and institutions, and even between voters and governments. And very importantly, between our companies and those that we hope to recruit. A great industry needs great people. We need people who are curious, people who can challenge the status quo, and who come up with new solutions. But young people have their own expectations. I just recently saw a McKinsey article underlined the fact that the millennial generation don't just want career growth, they also expect to make a positive contribution to society, as I think we all do. 14% of those millennials say they would not work in the oil and gas industry today because of its negative image. That's the highest percentage of any industry. So we need to do a better job about talking about the prosperity that we bring to countries, about the community development projects we deliver around the world, about the work we are leading to address the carbon emissions, and about our commitment to the energy transition. We can be proud of what we do. Our industry is a great industry, and we should not apologize for what we do. It has fueled an era of unprecedented growth. It has helped to raise living standards and lift people out of poverty all around the globe. Today we face new challenges, the challenges of competitiveness, of carbon, and our choices. But I believe that we will make the right choices and meet those challenges. We will attract great talent. We will play our part, in the journey to a low-carbon economy, we will win back trust. We will do more than survive. We will build an industry that is sustainable, economically and environmentally. I'm confident we have the ability in this hall and around the world to do this. And I hope this conference will act as an inspiration to all of us to renew our commitment to building the 21st century energy industry. I wish you all a great conference and have a great time here in London. And thank you very much.
I'd like to pick up on a couple of the things you talked about in your speech, starting with some of the points you made towards the conclusion about trust, recruitment, and also this kind of image problem that the industry has. What in your opinion, has the oil and gas industry been getting wrong in terms of its image, and what can it do to fix it?
Well, I think as an energy industry, we just think everybody knows what we do, and that all this energy we provide is just taken for granted. This is good for the world. But we don't, I sometimes think we talk to each other more than we do outwardly. Carbon is an issue. We have not attracted young people who want to use the latest digital tools in the same way as well. So I think it starts at young ages and all the way through society and politicians. I think if young people get involved in this industry and see the incredible seismic imaging, the engineering talent, the 3D, the AI, all the things that we're doing, that would certainly attract a whole new generation of people. When you bring them in and show them, they get very excited about it. I think there's another issue of trust right now. Trust is broken down, governments, politicians, companies, and it feels to me politicians are using big business as a way of somehow improving their own trust. And I think this is a trend that's not right, and I think this is a global problem. And I think we just have to be not defensive, but just keep telling people what we do, and it will work in many parts of the world. If you're in the United States or maybe in parts of Europe, the oil and gas industry is very unpopular. If you travel around the world, it's very popular in many places. It creates an enormous amount of jobs and wealth and industry. So we also have to keep a global perspective and not just of one geography.
I suppose the current downturn doesn't help either, does it? Because the people will look at this industry and they'll see thousands of people getting fired, and they think, well, maybe this is not an industry where I can build a long-term career.
We've been through a number of these cycles before, and this one reminds me of the 1980s, 86 through that decade. The reality is our industry got too big. It overspent. It had the luxury of $100 oil for 4 years, and people thought that was going to remain. Through many industries, there's times when you need to consolidate and make it leaner and more sustainable, and I think that is a tough part of what we must do today for our industry. And these reductions that we're going through have to be sustainable. They can't go right back up if or when ever the price goes back up.
Now, you talked about image, and one thing that is shaping both BP and the industry's image at the moment is this Deepwater Horizon film that is out in cinemas at the moment. What was your reaction when you heard that film was being made, and did you consider whether there was any way BP could work with the filmmakers to make sure the industry and your company was portrayed in a fair and accurate way?
Yeah, some of you may, probably everybody does know, there's a movie out about the Deepwater Horizon accident, and it takes the events that happened on the night of the accident, and it's actually a fairly good representation of the kind of courageous work that people do on offshore rigs. So in that sense, it's a good movie. It saddens us a bit at BP. It saddens me when I see it. I read the script and I saw it, and it clearly is also entertainment, and it's had to shape. It has villains and it has heroes, and I think that's what's part of good entertainment in a movie. But there's only 4 BP people in the movie, and I know they are not portrayed. I know 2 of them personally. They are not portrayed like the consummate professionals that they are. So if you do see the movie, I think you have to look through that, learn a little bit about our industry. But it saddens us at BP the way people were portrayed. But we recognize it's entertainment.
But was there any? As I said, did you consider any way you could work with the filmmakers or cooperate, or that didn't happen?
Well, I saw the comments by the director who kind of seemed to provoke us a bit about saying that we tried to stop the movie and tried to scare people from being in the movie. I mean, we were never going to do that. I think there were a couple of our employees who came and said, could we be extras in the movie? And we said, that's probably a bridge too far. But no, we didn't in any way try to stop the movie being made.
Okay. Just to pick up on something else you were talking about, which is cost and competitiveness, and you referred to this need to keep some of the cost savings that have been made since the downturn began. I mean, how confident are you about that? Do you think the savings that the majors and the rest of the industry have been making over the last couple of years are going to be lost if we get a rebound in activity? Are we going to see cost inflation once again if prices rebound?
Well, our goal is with the cost reductions that we were putting in place, that 75% of them will stay and stick, coming through whatever, if there's a cycle here. There's about 25%, of course, will go up in day rates as if costs come back up. But, you know, BP will go in our upstream business from 30,000, this is just the upstream part of the business, from 30,000 to 18,000 by the end of next year. Now, a lot of that is simplification of what we do. We became very complicated company after the accident, restructured it. I think we have our confidence back. Safety and reliability is still going to be number one in what we do. But there's also new technologies that are coming into this business. If you, in the seismic imaging area, that things that used to take 4 and 5 months now take literally minutes with some of the computing power we have. So there's also technology coming in that will reduce costs. But the challenge must be to make this sustainable.
Now, we seem to be, possibly with this OPEC, fragile sort of OPEC deal that was announced a few weeks ago, we may be looking at some kind of price stability around $50, $55 a barrel in the medium term. Is that the sort of price that a company like BP, the other integrated majors, can work at, given your sort of focus on mega projects, which have been notoriously an issue in terms of cost control?
Well, last year we said that we needed to balance our sources and uses of funds at 60, and we had quite a job to get it to that for 2017. We're now somewhere just south of $55 next year. We'll be able to balance our sources and uses of funds, and that includes dividends, and in our case, lots of fines, and our capital program. So, yes, this is essential to rebase the cost, but if we can operate in the $50 range as a company, we have to going forward, and still invest for growth going forward.
Okay. I think maybe at this point we could open this up to questions from the floor. There are microphones around. I think if anyone has a question, wants to raise their hand.
Oliver Klaus with Energy Intelligence. Mr. Dudley, I have a question on Iran. NIOC has said that BP is close to signing an MOU to explore E&P opportunities in the country. I wanted to ask if this is correct. And if so, is this a reflection of the improved upstream terms the Iranians say they would be offering? Thank you.
Thanks, Oliver. I read in the papers about a new contract that Iran is putting out. I haven't actually read or don't know the contents of the contract. We, like a lot of companies, have met with friends in Iran, but we have no agreements at the moment, and don't really know what those agreements would be. I'm going to be honest and say we're also going to be really careful about the imposition and the definition of sanctions of working in Iran, because I don't know what they all are. There's 2 different groups of sanctions from the U.S., and we're going to have to be really careful about it as a company. But I will say this, I think it applies not only to Iran, it's countries like Mexico and others. This is a hyper-competitive world for capital. And investing in Iran because it's Iran is not what companies should do. They should invest where there's attractive investments as an initial criteria. And so not knowing what the terms are, it's kind of hard to comment.
Hi Bob, it's Mike.
Oh, Mike, hi.
Mike Ritchie from Energy Intelligence. So in Russia, where of course BP has the 19.75% stake in Rosneft. We've just had the Rosneft taking over 50% plus in Bashneft for 5.3 billion. I wondered if you could say what you think about that deal, and also what are BP's obligations? Do you have to stump up any of the money, or does your shareholding get affected?
No, what Mike's talking about is Rosneft acquired a company called Bashneft in Russia. It's about a 400,000 barrel a day company for $5.3 billion. And I think that's a very good acquisition by Rosneft. It is in the heartlands of what Rosneft does, just north of Orenburg. There'll be a lot of just natural synergies, water flooding, and the kinds of techniques that Rosneft works all through Russia. So I think it's a very good investment. It doesn't affect our shareholding. We'll still retain the 19.75% of a bigger company now. So I think that and the purchase of the SR refinery in India, which opens up for Rosneft a global trading activity, is also good and healthy for the company. And I just came back from Moscow last night, and I think these are good steps by Rosneft, and our relationship is good and doesn't really affect a change on these. We were asked our opinion, of course, on voting on the boards on these things, and so no problems in Russia.
Okay.
Hi, hello, it's Martin Ratz. I'm with Morgan Stanley. You said now on 2 occasions just now that competition for capital is very intense. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that. Do you mean that with your capital competing for projects against others is very intense, or do you mean something different? I know CapEx has come down, but you're still spending $15 to $16 billion every year. Do you mean that that competition sort of from governments to attract your capital is very intense, and as a result of that, you might actually get some better returns on that on those CapEx dollars?
Well, I think it's both. I think it's both. When I think of competition for capital, we regard our capital as incredibly scarce. We're going to make and rework and rework and rework and make sure our use of capital is very efficient. But having said that, there's more and more opportunities out there so that some of them can compete for capital. Sometimes it's new capital, sometimes it means we maybe stop doing something we were doing. And you will have seen that we backed away from exploration in Australia recently, expensive frontier exploration, because strategically we realized that if we found oil there, it was going to be many years of billions of capital there, and so we're redirecting some of our activities. But I think it's on both cases. Not all governments realize how tight the world of capital is. Some do, and they're changing their terms to attract investment. So it's both. Most importantly for us, we've got to be very disciplined about ours. You should be happy to hear that as a shareholder.
Just to follow up on that point, if I can just ask one more question. In Abu Dhabi, you have famously stayed away from the renewal of the onshore concession. The offshore concession, in which you're also a legacy partner, is up for renewal very soon, and there's been some changes in the offshore with the structure of the offshore joint ventures. I just wonder what you thought of that. Does that change your thinking on whether BP is going to be interested in the renewal of the offshore concession? Because this is also, as you say, it's one of these areas where it's got to compete for your capital against all these other opportunities in Iran, Mexico, and so on.
Yeah, there's a number of the big companies that are here as well. We've worked in Abu Dhabi for 75 years. One of the concessions came up for renewal, and the economics were just too difficult for us within our capital framework. So we stepped back from that. We'd like to keep working in the offshore areas. That one comes up for renewal, I think, in 2018, and we'll just have to evaluate it. I mean, we really like to work in the UAE. It's a great place, but again, it just has to compete for our capital, and I don't know the answer yet.
Gati Al-Jaburi, Luko. The difference in the exchange rate, the official exchange rate, and the market rate in Egypt has just shot up to about 70%, which doesn't really bode very well for the future of the economy by the looks of things. Can you tell us what your view is on Egypt, and what is the strategy for BP in Egypt?
Yeah, I'm optimistic about Egypt. I know that it's a country, in my view, that is waiting to get through a period here where these big industrial developments of gas, the Eni ones, the BP ones, come on stream. And they should come on stream next year. Egypt has benefited from the low price of oil, but it is also short of gas. And that gas is required to electrify the country, get the power generation going. And I think it's got a little bit of a tough time here. I know it's working with the IMF to kind of get through a hurdle here. But I'm optimistic when those big projects come on, Egypt can be a different country. In our case, and I know with our friends at E&I, we're being paid in pounds. We're using the pounds in those industrial projects today, so it's okay, and our economics there are reasonably good. So I'm optimistic about Egypt, and I know not everyone is, but I am. I think it's really important for Egypt to remain stable in the Middle East.
Thank you. I'm Samira Khawar from Argus Media. Given the competition for financing, I'd like to ask you about the Rumaila field in Iraq. Are you investing in just keeping capacity at the current rate, or are you already investing in boosting capacity towards its targets? And what's your projection for reaching the full target capacity at Rumaila? Thank you.
For those of you who don't know, the Rumaila field is this giant, wonderful oil field in southern Iraq, near the Kuwait border, that BP manages with our Chinese partners CNPC and SOC in a joint venture that sounds very complicated. It works very well. And production has gone up from that field from around 1 million barrels a day to 1.4 million barrels a day now. The way those contracts work is we invest capital, it is reimbursed through lifting of cargoes, and there's a fee. Given the stress of, and that field produces about 50% of the money into the entire treasury of the country of Iraq, so it's really important. But given the funding challenges that Iraq has today, and of course in the conflict, they have said don't spend too much capital because we can't keep up with it. So at the moment, we're maintaining production at 1.4 million barrels a day, and we're not ramping up our capital spending because that gets the contract out of alignment. And I think Iraq, we should all hope that Iraq remains stable and gets through this period. So we're not increasing right now.
Okay, I'm afraid that is all we've got time for in this session. Please join me in thanking Bob Dudley for spending some time with us this morning.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.